heard Rose's talk for the first time. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure where this fits in. It might be related to third-party revenge. I'm not sure. But we can talk about it. So I'm picturing Dan Ames here at Columbia. I have to say it's the other Dan Ames, who got his PhD with me last year. This is, I'm going to be talking from his dissertation program of research, just because I think it's very cool, and it's probably the most relevant to motivation of what we've been doing in my life lately. He's now a postdoc with Matt Lieberman at UCLA. He's a social neuroscientist, but also, as you can see, does what we now call behavioral research. Only, actually, this is behavioral research, something going back around well-being. Anyway, but to give you a bigger context, I didn't just get interested in intent when Dan started doing his dissertation. I think, it's one of those things, revealed preferences. You look back at your work and you say, oh, there's a theme here. I'm interested in intent. But one domain which we've been particularly interested in intent is in the stereotype content model, where we made the argument that people perceive other people's intent quite quickly, and it's obligatory, and so it's like the sentry who calls out in the night, all who goes there, friend or foe. You have to know that for survival purposes, or walking down in New York Street at night, certainly anyway. And we have posited that when you decide a person is cooperative and on your side, then they're trustworthy and warm. The other part of that decision is whether they're able to act on their intentions, which we call competence. So this warmth by competence map, a number of you have heard me talk about it before. This is not what the talk is about, but it's background. We've applied this warmth by competence map to a variety of social groups, immigrants, social classes, and ethnic groups. They all are perceived as having intent for good or ill and ability to act on it or not. But other entities have intent besides social groups. Individuals have intent. It works at an individual level of analysis. It works with animals even. People perceive animals as warm or not warm, and competent or not competent. And by the way, we keep the incompetent, stupid ones who have good intentions. Corporations have intentions. Even different diseases seem to have different implications for people's competence and warmth. But with all that as context, intent detection matters, especially when harm is being done and blame is being assessed. And so between social groups, this comes up most often when you think another group did something to your group on purpose, and they were able to do it, and then that makes you really angry. And so that's when the revenge starts to come in. Just to give you some examples of this, of the ways that people detect groups' intent. People who are poor or homeless or immigrants are seen as having bad intent and having no confidence to act on it, so they're not good for anything. The in-group and its allies are seen as having good intentions and the ability to act on them. So this is your basic intergroup relations map of the great in-group and a whole level out-group. But in our case, we also look at ambivalent combinations. For example, well-intentioned people who don't have the ability to act on their intentions, and enviable groups that, by the way, are competent, but they're not on your side. Okay, and so I would be remiss not to mention Amy Cuddy, who is the second or third most watched TED Talk on the planet. So go watch it. Keep that those statistics up there, along with the 27,000 Twitter followers she's got. You never know where your graduate students are going to go. And Peter Glick has been working on this with us as well, and also on the ambivalent sexism work, which is related to this but not relevant. So just as a final bit of context, this is how our social group maps look. As a parent, I can tell you, I think it's entertaining that children start out in the warm but incompetent cell, and then go down to the dark side as teenagers. And then they become regular people later on in the upper right corner. So the reason this matters in intergroup relations is that various intergroup emotions follow from this, and these predict various kinds of specific discrimination in go to groups depending on their intentions and their abilities to act on it, so how dangerous they are to you. There's a threat dimension that goes from the top left to the bottom right. So more advertising for the stereotype content model. We're now up to 2 or 3 dozen different countries. It meets the eyeball test in all these different countries. If you take local groups and ask people to tell you which ones are trustworthy and warm and which ones are competent and incompetent, you look at it and it's like getting a geographical map of the country. It's like suddenly you understand a level of how things work in that society that you didn't understand before. It also means more rigorous empirical tests of predictive stuff. So, my point is that the detection of intent is a really fundamental social type of process at the societal level in groups, but also with individuals who meet at a conference, for example. And we see it across different kinds of samples. We see it over place. We see it over time. It's not a sort of modern, politically correct invention. And you see it over levels of analysis. We're now up to lots and lots of different kinds of subtyping studies. And as I mentioned, you see it over other intent-having entities like animals and corporations. Okay, so where is intent in here? I haven't eaten the horse dead yet. Intent is at the beginning. So these images predict behavior. I said that matters. But emotions are the proximal predictors of behavior. So the role of emotion is going to come back into the motivational story I want to tell you. But the upstream predictor of all this is people's perceptions of social structure. Who is competitive or cooperative? Therefore, they have bad intentions. It's like on the playground. The kid who's competing with me is not nice. And who's high status and low status? High status people are supposedly competent. Correlated to 0.8 around the world. It's not just American meritocracy, it's everywhere. And intent is a magic single word variable that drives the whole thing. So with that background, sort of good credibility to it, we've been thinking about intent for a while. So I think Chuck got up here and said he's been working on something for a couple of decades. Well, I've been working on something for a couple of years with Dan Ames, and we want to talk about that. So the primacy of intents in sort of everyday, regular experience is, okay, I come over to your house and say, I'm going to make you appetizers. Well, I set your kitchen on fire, sorry about that. But I was really intending to make something quite nice. So probably forgive me, but what's more interesting is that probably your estimate of the damage to your kitchen differs depending on whether I was intending it or not. And that's the case under me. So the hypothesis is that intentional harms seem worse to people even when they're not. And I hope by the end of my 10 minutes remaining, they'll look at this to you. So the hypothesis is that perceived intention magnifies harm. First example, scenario study, a CEO decides to invest in a software development project. It fails, either intentionally or not. The intentional condition is he wants to treat his complacent employees as a lesson, or not. But they don't know that he did it on purpose. So in all these studies, the victims don't know whether it's intentional or not. Okay, so that's independent of what's going on here. So in the scenario, the employees make less money, they had some anxiety, things were harder for them, they had a dip in credit. But these are hard to put dollar figures on. We asked them to estimate harm. In the two studies, what you find is when the harm is intentional, everything is held constant. People see it as worse than when the harm is unintentional. And the thing that's interesting about this is that it's the intentions of the CEO that are the only thing that differs, and they're not actually relevant to how much pain the employees are suffering. So what's going on here? What's with this? Well, the harm to the employees was a little amorphous, so what if we make it more objective? what if you have some kind of ground truth, like dollars? So we did a different scenario where a desert river dries up for 2 weeks, and if there was either human cause or natural cause, the community suffers, crop failure, they're dehydrated, sick, miserable, but their resilience, they're not totally destroyed. And we flashed up dollar amounts for each of these things. And people's job was to estimate the dollar total at the end. And they knew that when they saw the dollars being flashed up. So we have an objective answer, and when it's unintentional, you can see that people are quite accurate. But when it's intentional, they inflate it. When we incentivize them, it doesn't make any difference. And then we also thought, well, maybe they're applying punitive damages in some way, so then we separated out in the light gray bar punitive damages from actual damage to be reimbursed, and it makes it go down a little bit, but it doesn't make it go away. So what we've shown so far is that intent magnifies harm. What do we think is the mechanism? We think it's moral outrage. And so this is sort of relevant, but you have to kind of squint to see its relevance. And it's not about they did this to me, it's a third party, so it's different in that way too. But we think that human cooperation depends on people not doing bad things to other people on purpose, and that people feel some protective feeling about somebody violating this really fundamental social contract that people have with each other. You're not supposed to do bad stuff to people on purpose. And so we measured blame motivation in a correlated scale, wanting to condemn, punish, and blame. Right? Reliability is always good. What you see is that there's good mediation model going on, and if you flip the last two variables, it's not as good a fit. So it's correlationally consistent with this idea. So far we've seen some support for our hypothesis, despite various controls, that is for the harm being identical, controlling for future harm. I didn't tell you about that study, but the CEO was fired or not, so he can't repeat the behavior, he gets punished even. It doesn't make it go away. Objective information on harm's extent, incentives for accuracy. And what we've argued in that correlational mediational model is that people have a motivation to blame, condemn, and punish. So can we measure this? This is the fun part. And the reason why I had to do this talk here. Can we measure the motivation to blame, condemn, and punish directly? So wake up with an idea. All right. So we thought about the possibility that this could be a sort of cognitive phenomenon, that people are seeing the motivation to blame as just a description of the actor as blameworthy. That would be kind of a cognitive thing, and that would not be so interesting motivation. And we, meaning Dan, thought about the animal behavior literature and how we measure motivation in animals in particular. Well, there are a couple different ways. One is choice, choosing to do an activity over other pretty good activities, or the sheer rate and persistence and effort and duration of doing the activity. So think rats pressing levers, right? So we did that with people online. So the scenario here is a nursing home. It's the same action, mixing up pills, same person, Jake, same harms, symptoms of the medical costs that were listed, same people, the residents. Either Jake did it on purpose, or he did it by accident. Very plausible. Comes from news reports. And we looked to see whether in the first case people would choose to blame, condemn, and punish over other appealing activities they could do for the second part of the study. What you see is people like doing the quiz, but it doesn't matter how intentional it is. Doing similar questions they like pretty well, but blame, condemn, and punish, they particularly want to do it when intentional rather than unintentional. And other things show less difference and just in the opposite direction. So that's one indicator of being motivated to blame, condemn, and punish. Another one was the persistence measure. So again, the same scenario, was intentional or not, and Dan's a great experiment. So what he did was he set people up to click on an envelope to send notices to people to sign a petition against Jake. And he did it with variable reinforcement, right? Because every time you ask somebody for a signature, they don't sign. So the variable reinforcement went from 1 out of 3 times when you click on the envelope, you get a signature, and you're shown the petition, right? So it's very rewarding to get these names on the petition. But then over time, it gets less and less rewarding. And so eventually people are going to take off this behavior. But you go from rat presses to mouse clicks, and you can measure effort rate and duration. So what I like about this is it's online, but it's behavior. And here's what you see. So when it's intentional, people start higher, they persist longer. They do eventually extinguish when it just gets to be too much, but it takes them a long time. Whereas, when it's unintentional, it's less so. Different, and the duration is one. So, finishing early. So, this is not a penultimate summary, this is actually the summary. Because I'm trying to talk now. So, my point is just that people care a lot about other people's intentions, and there's a reason that we think about other people's minds, and most of it is not to know the content of what they know and don't know, and whether something is occluded from their view or not. What's more important is to figure out what their intentions are, because the intentions, we think, predict behavior. And if I don't know what the person's behavior is going to be in either a cooperative or competitive situation, then I don't know what they're going to do. And so I think this is really crucial, and nowhere is it more crucial than when harm has been done. And no harm, no fault. My lab helped out with all the